with Maryland Business Roundtable for Education. Today we're doing a Maryland Scholar Speakers Bureau session, and I am your host, Annalisa Sawyer, State Program Manager. And I am so excited for everyone that's watching because you guys are in for a very special treat. We have one of our veteran, as I will call him, volunteers, Mr. Christopher Carter, joining us today, who is going to give us some awesome information on a session that we called Reality Checks. So, Mr. Carter, thank you so much for joining us. How are you today?
We are wonderful down here in the state of Georgia with this beautiful sunshine and blue skies you see behind me.
Absolutely awesome. We are so honored to have you with us today. So, thank you for taking time out of your busy day to join us and just kind of share some of your wisdom with us on this really important section for all of our students and viewers that are watching, which we call Reality Check. So, we're going to go ahead and get started if you don't mind. So, just to kind of start us off, could you tell us a little bit about where you work and what you do and just kind of how you got involved with MBRT?
Oh wow. And I'm supposed to take that in a little short amount of time. Okay. Um I'm a supervisor IT specialist, which is I'm a section chief with the Internal Revenue Service. Um I've been with the service now for a little over, well, in fact, this month will be 14 years. Um I started with
Congratulations.
MBRT, woo wee. Back, it's been probably about a decade, so I would say right now probably about man, this is 2020, so probably around about 2010, while I was in college working on my undergrad. Professor mentioned it to us about MBRT, and it was something I said, well, let me check into it. And I started it, my very first session, I think somewhere around 2011 or somewhere around about that. And I had been doing it ever since then. And I have thoroughly enjoyed it. That's how come I've been coming back year after year.
Well, we certainly appreciate having you and thank you so much for all that you've done and continue to do, even remotely from Georgia for MBRT. Again, I'm just so honored to be able to have this time to spend with you. So, we're going to go ahead. I know your time is valuable and I want to honor that. We're going to go ahead and get started with our session. Just to let those that are watching know, we're going to have a link that should pop up very shortly that's going to allow you all to pull up our online version of our magazine, Way to Be, and it'll allow you to kind of at your time on your leisure to kind of look through the magazine if you don't have an actual copy of it and see some of this wonderful information that Mr. Carter will be talking about. But we'll also have some slides available for you to see during the presentation. So let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up the first slide. So in the reality check section of the magazine, we have an example of some basic expenses and some basic average take home pays. So what about this? Or is this really realistic? And if so, how? And if not, why isn't it?
Well, I'm looking at it and I've kind of been kind of mulling over it because this is a reality as far as what people are doing today and making as far as wages. Now, one thing which I will say is it's also dependent on where you live. Okay. I'm looking here at one room, one bedroom apartment for basically about $1,300. Yeah, that's a reality. I was kind of surprised. Like I said, I we had moved up around the West Virginia, Maryland area, and we've been going 14 years. We just came back home last year, and this price right here for a one bedroom apartment before we left, it was drastically cheaper. But now that's a reality here. But up around the DC area, this right here, that's the equivalent of a cardboard box, in my opinion. But looking at these expenses, and I kind of see like, okay, car payment, car insurance, gas,
Right.
maintenance. That's kind of that's kind of on the low side, I would think. And the reason why I would say that is it's dependent on what type of car you have, uh, also depending on what type of insurance you have. So I think uh, the car payment that might be kind of in a in a reality realm. That insurance, depending, once again, if you're talking about young people, that insurance, $450 along with gas, that's going to be really low, because
Right.
somebody that's, I think, under 25, their insurance is going to really be high. Gas, once again, it depends on how much you may have to commute. Um, for people who can do a lot of teleworking, their gas may not be that high. Like I would say, like with me, with the gas that I put out for a month, the way I work, um, I think I probably put out maybe probably about $50 a month, and that's kind of stretching it because I don't
Wow.
really have to do a lot of traveling. I can do a lot of my stuff teleworking. So electricity, once again, $150. Uh, that would be depending on the season, because in your colder regions it may be a lot higher. I mean, drastically higher. And whereas down south it may not be that cold. Phone, internet, cable, that's kind of in the realm of where it should be, but it also depends on what type of package you will have. Now that $350 per month, it kind of depends on how you're eating. And the reason why I say how you're eating, because it's known that if you do a lot of cooking, which we eat a lot of cooking home, a lot of homemade. My wife is a Southern girl, and everything she cooks is homemade, and I thank God for it. But um, our food bill would be relatively cheaper, whereas if you were going to different restaurants or whatever, that would be higher. Now, when it comes to your total expenses to compare it to your net pay, and a lot of times I understand that young people, they sometimes get this a little confused. You have your gross pay and your net pay. And your gross pay, that make it look really nice. But that's your gross. In other words, that's everything before taxes. Now, once those taxes come out, it really takes a chunk out of your check. And with this particular one, your net pay being uh, just say $1,800. Well, if you look over at your expenses every month, even if these were just your expenses, there were no other unexpected expenses, such as a car having some car trouble. You may have to fix that, or a hot water tank, whatever, an additional expense that you may not have taken an account for. Well, you're already every month right now, you're looking at going 1,100 to $1,200 in the hole. In other words, your expenses are totally exceeding, and I do mean grossly exceeding what you're bringing in. And with that, this is a recipe for disaster. And when I say disaster, I'm saying financial disaster, because you may manage to make enough. And when I say make enough, in other words, you may borrow some money or whatever to pay for this month. But remember, you have next month to come. And now, if you did borrow money, you have that additional expense. And I'm trying to get out of the sunshine. All right, there you go. With that additional expense, it's just making you go down even further in the hole. So yes, this would be, in most respects, this would be a relatively, I would say relatively, yeah, that would be it. But the main thing is when you get down to the equation as far as what you're actually bringing in and what you're actually expending, that is definitely a reality, because a lot of people are in this particular mode. They are spending more than what they are actually making.
And
So yeah, this would kind of, I would say, yes, that would be true. This would be a good visual for someone to see. But I also would believe that depending, your expenses could be a whole lot higher than this, though.
wow, you have given so many good things. I kind of want to backtrack to a couple of them. One of the things I kept hearing you say was this depends on where you live. So it sounds like that even though we've given this pretty good example of what expenses could look like, it could be significantly higher or lower depending on where you live or how
Correct.
you govern yourself. So
Correct.
with that in mind, what are some things that you have seen, either from your job or just personally, that could cause a person to kind of have this kind of out of balance? And I've pulled up the other slide, and if you wouldn't mind kind of referring to that when we're looking at this paycheck, because just even in my experience with some of our students, they think if they're making, $15 or $16 an hour, that, oh my goodness, they've hit the holy grail and that they'll be able to live this lavish lifestyle. So I wanted you to kind of speak on that, if you would, like how that kind of relates and ties into all of this in conjunction with, cost of living in different places.
Okay, that was kind of near and dear to me, and I'll give you a good example, which is a personal example. Um, we
Sure.
were living in Maryland uh, from 2015 up until last year, and we wanted to transfer back to Georgia because, like I said, we're back on our property and everything. And in and we're talking about cost of living now. The cost of living down here in Georgia is a lot cheaper, and so when I actually transferred from Maryland down here to Georgia, I actually took about a $16,000 pay cut. And a lot of people are like, oh
Wow.
my goodness, 16,000, that's a lot. Well, it is a lot, but also you have to take in consideration the cost of living, because my wife and I, we looked at it, like I said, we made all the calculations and we thought about it. And in actuality, even though it appears on paperwork that I was taking a $16,000 pay cut, with moving back here to Georgia, back onto our property and everything, we actually, on paper, taking a $16,000 pay cut. In actuality, we actually were actually making a couple of $1,000s more because of a lot of expenses
Wow.
that we did not have up in Maryland. We no longer have those down here. So that's how come, yes, where you are, just like, okay, I have employees that are all over the country, and you're living here, say in Georgia, an employee that we have in California, it's no way in the world the wages that someone makes here in Georgia, making those same wages, it's no way in the world they couldn't live in California. They would, I'll use the term, they would be surviving. And when you look at this on page
Wow.
5, excuse me, when you look at this on page 5, as far as what the different positions make, and one thing that should be, to me, a stark reality and a stark contrast is, give you a very classic example. The one at the very bottom, and I'm trying to pull it up on my tablet.
Let's see. I can
Okay.
kind of make it a little bit bigger for you if that helps.
Hold on just a second.
Sure.
Okay, the one on my tablet, and
Did we lose you? I think we may have lost him when he pulled it up on his tablet. Let's see if I can try and get him back. I think he may have accidentally disconnected himself. We'll give him a second to see if he gets back in. But I can honestly say that one of the things that Mr. Carter was just saying, oh, there he is. He's coming back to us.
hello, can you hear me?
Mr. Carter, do
Yeah,
we
I'm
have
back.
you
Can you
back?
hear me? Can you hear me?
Okay, we'll give him a second to see if he gets reconnected. But as I was saying, one of the things that Mr. Carter was speaking on that I can definitely say is that cost of living, depending on where you live. I'm originally from Houston myself, and I know the cost of living there is a lot cheaper than here in Maryland. So when he was talking about taking that salary decrease, if you look at what a person here in a position is making and having a job somewhere else, that the cost of living is exponentially cheaper, it totally changes the scheme of what you bring home, how your expenses balance out or don't balance out. So a lot of the things that he was saying in that regard with where you live definitely makes a huge difference, because your expenses become decreased even if you have the same amount of expenses, or sometimes you can end up on the plus side because you can eliminate expenses altogether. And I believe that's where he was headed with that. So it totally makes sense. One of the other questions that I was going to ask Mr. Carter before he got disconnected was, what are some of the misconceptions that young people make with regards to expenses and spending? And I can say what I've noticed, even with my own child, some of the expenses that she thinks don't exist or won't happen to her, like Mr. Carter was saying, you'll sometimes end up with what we call unexpected expenses. The car breaks down, or something in your home goes out. You may suffer an injury. And if you don't have enough money either saved up or available for you to use, that can throw off budgeting, or can throw off what your available income is. So those are things that you have to definitely take into consideration, not only when you're looking at jobs, but also when you're looking at how you're spending the money that you have available. So these are things that like definitely come into play when you're looking at expenses. So I kind of want to focus back on one of the slides that I pulled up a second ago with regard to the paycheck. So let me pull that up for you guys to see. So when we're looking at the net pay, you'll see this is an average paycheck of a person that was making roughly about $15 an hour. And to most people, that sounds really good. And it's not horrible. Please don't think that making $15 an hour is small. But when your expenses exceed what you're able to bring home after you take out insurance, after you take out taxes, if you have benefits, those things that come out, it totally changes the scope of what you're available to actually have. So those are things that you definitely have to take into consideration as well. I think Mr. Carter is trying to join us back again. We're going to see. Oh, nope, he got booted out again. It's okay. We're going to kind of keep going. So when we look at, again, some of these things that I was saying about these deductions that come out, your insurance, your benefits, if your job offers you benefits, the taxes, when you deduct those things from what we call your gross pay, which is what you make per hour times the amount of hours that you work, if that final number, which is your net or bring home pay, is greater than what you actually, than what your expenses are, then you'll be fine. But if your expenses are greater than what your net or bring home pay is, that's where he was saying you run into that problem of being in the hole, which you definitely don't want to do, because that creates a huge amount of debt for you. And for those of you that tuned in to our financial literacy series, you'll know that we're trying to keep it to a point where we are not trying to be in debt whatsoever. One of the other questions that I wanted to ask Mr. Carter were, what are some of the things that young people can do in order to keep themselves in a realistic frame of mind when they're starting to take on their own financial obligations? And I learned this in our financial literacy series. Budgeting is key. When you plan and have a budget, it allows you to really see what extra income, if any, you have available to do some of the things that you want to do, as opposed to not being able to afford the things that are necessities, such as your rent, your cable, if you have a car, your car note, your insurance, all those things that are priority or should be priority to you, as opposed to your entertainment expenses, or sometimes even cell phone. When Mr. Carter mentioned about having packages, sometimes we have to look at having maybe basic packages as opposed to having the top of the line package if we don't have the income to allow us to have those types of things. So these are things that we have to, kind of take a look at. So as you're starting to earn money, if you're a young person, or even if you're not such a young person, as you get a new job and you're looking at what your salary, is and how you can break that down, I strongly suggest working out a budget to see how much money you have left over with your current expenses, and then kind of maybe do some self-evaluation and look at whether or not you need some of the things that you currently have, or some of the things that you're looking at having, to make sure that you're not overextending yourself and putting yourself in a situation where you'll end up having a huge amount of debt or debt at all. We really want to try and help our young people to understand that debt is not necessarily a bad thing, because there are some things that we do have to purchase on credit or do have a certain amount of debt. If you're purchasing a large home, those are investment things. It's okay for those things. But if you're frivolously buying things or paying for things on credit and you know that you're not able to afford them because your bring home pay doesn't allow you, you want to kind of try and avoid falling into those types of pitfalls. The last thing I want to focus on before we get ready to kind of move on, and I hate that you guys aren't able to hear Mr. Carter. He's so much better than me. But I'm going to switch slides really quickly. And it's one of the things that Mr. Carter kind of talked about, some sample jobs in Maryland. If you are able to look at this, and for those of you that aren't able to see it, there is a link that should have come up for you guys where you can pull up a digital copy again of our magazine, Way to Be, and this is found on page 5. It lists some jobs in Maryland and what their average salaries are, as well as the degrees that are required for these types of positions. So you'll see at the top, we have doctors or physicians, and you'll see that there are there's a huge salary difference between there and what's at the bottom. But you'll also notice that the educational requirements vary as well. So I strongly encourage you, when you're thinking about career opportunities, take a look at that as well. And if you notice, the higher your degree or education level, the higher your earning potential is. Now, that's not to say that every job that allows you to live in a financially stable or a great place financially requires you to have a high level degree. But for the most part, most of the higher paying jobs do require those high level degrees. But again, it's about your interest, it's about your focus, and it's about finding what's going to make you happy and where you're going to be most successful. But please don't think that you can't do that with a lower paying job if that's where your interest lies and you're able to live within that budget frame. So these are just some things that you want to think about as people are starting to make these decisions about what they want to do, how they plan on trying to spend their money, and what is going to work for them in a budget sense. So I definitely want to make sure that we are stressing that these are the things that are going to be able to help you to be able to be successful financially, and just to help you have a realistic outlook on how to spend money once you start earning it, or if you've already started to earn it, and how you can use your money in a beneficial way to you. So unfortunately, we weren't able to get Mr. Carter back on our session. I really hate that. Hopefully, we'll get a chance to have him rejoin us at another time with a different session, because I promise you, he is phenomenal, a whole lot better than me, I guarantee it. So again, I want to thank you guys for joining us today on our Maryland Scholar Speakers Bureau session, Reality Check. Thank you to Mr. Carter for trying to join us as long as you possibly could. We truly still appreciate your effort and willingness to come in with us. Please don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and check out our Way to Be app, which is available for you to download in the Apple or Google store. And for MVRT, I am Annalisa Sawyers, our state program manager, signing off, and we'll see you guys on our next session. Take care.